water tax campaign provided a base, an audience of people who are willing to listen to alternatives to neoliberalism, to listen to alternatives, to anti-corporate alternatives, who were sceptical enough of everything, not let alone the EU, but everything, to question almost anything. And I believe it gives us a huge opportunity in relation to TTIP, because as Frank will explain, the dangers of TTIP are absolutely immense. And the difficulty, because we've signed off on our sovereign right to vote on the various treaties, it won't go to public treaty. It won't go to public vote. With that, the work that we have to do is to mobilise enough public opinion, enough people to force their agenda back without being able to take the people. If this were to go to a public vote, I would be quite confident, given the results of the last referendum, I would be quite confident that we could turn the vote against the likes of TTIP. But unfortunately, I don't believe we're going to get that opportunity. So Frank will give you a much more insightful view of the treaty itself, and maybe if people have any questions for him towards the end, we can have a chat then. Thanks, Frank.
Right. That's a big challenge, insightful. But I think you can actually look at this map of the world, or part of the world, the northern part of the world, and it tells you everything. It tells you everything I'm going to say. You can see what's happening. These are the rulers of the future that TTIP goes through. Multinational corporations, we're familiar with them all. Corporate interests will rule, and there's no doubt about that. But not just TTIP. The second one here is CETA, and that's the Canadian-EU agreement. CETA doesn't stand for Canada, it's comprehensive, it stands for. It's just as bad. And the difference is, most of what we know about TTIP has been from leaks. WikiLeaks has been very good, got some very good stuff. Some of the people involved have leaked. It's impossible to hold everything secret. But this one here is different. We know what's in that. That's been published. It's had what's called its legal scrub. It's ready to go to the European Parliament. The European Parliament, if it decides by absolute majority to accept it, absolute majority is 50% of membership plus one, then we don't know what's going to happen after that, whether it goes to national parliaments or whether it will be decided in council. All the Commission is saying is that it will be decided by each individual member state. Now, I'll tell you later on, there is a case. The Singapore Agreement has one aspect of TTIP and CETA as part of its provisions, and that has been referred to the ECJ, the EU Court of Justice, for adjudication as to how it should be ratified. We're still waiting. The history of the EU Court of Justice, I put EU there deliberately, is that it tries to extend the powers and the reach of the EU. So I wouldn't have much hope in that regard. This is my assistant, Al he's like, I saw him in two later on, but anyway. So what am I going to talk about? Well, first of all, this Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. You might notice that it says trade and investment, but if I said to you that in the area of trade, that tax or excise on trade between the EU and the US averages 3%, is the excise duty on average. The highest is 25%, and that's on crockery of all things. So this part here, trade, forms a relatively small part. The investment part is bigger, because of course what they're looking for is to wipe out regulation. This is what all this is about. Now, regulation is something that liberal or neoliberal politicians do not like. I have a photograph of 3 of them later on that I'll show to you. Downward regulation, as I call it, the downward regulation photograph. CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, is between the EU and Canada, and the final text is now public. It's very dense, there's 500 and something pages in it. So the echo is something else we dealt with the Lisbon Treaty, a lot of pages in it as well. It's certainly designed to discourage ordinary people from having a read at it. It took me a long time to find out what it said about water, but I did find out. So, I'm going to talk also about the likely effect on water provision in Ireland. That's public water provision. Should either or both have been ratified, because you can deduce that the same thing is in TTIP as in CETA. It probably couldn't worse it, because a lot of the water supply, public water supply in the US is actually municipally controlled by the individual states. It's not, only 10% of it is privately controlled. But in Canada, it's a slightly different situation, and you see later on that part of the European input into CETA is opening up opportunities in Canada for entry of private interests into the water provision arena. So water provision is liquid gold for multinational corporations, but unaffordable for the poor. And any of you who've taken an interest in the water charges issue will know about what happened in Cochabamba and Bolivia. They happened to be in Bolivia at the time, and people were very excited, much more excited than they are here. I think people are excited here to see those guys. They managed to change the government and change it radically, and they elected the first indigenous president in the history of the country. He's still there actually, Evan Wallace. There have been a few attempts on him, but unsuccessful, thankfully. So water is a fundamental issue that we should all be very concerned about. So Ireland is not involved in negotiations other than a few civil servants. I found out there was one or two civil servants all right. You remember these Fine Gael youth posters during the Lisbon Treaty? Well, it was the Lisbon Treaty that knocked us out of negotiations. One with a pair of big melons and a fellow with an EU shorts on him. The legend is increase your prospects. Vote yes to Lisbon. They're Israeli watermelons. I think so, yeah. And the other one says, enlarge your opportunities, vote yes to Lisbon. That's the man. So, anyway, Article 3 of that treaty really introduces neoliberalism as a principle of the EU. We were saying that at the time and nobody was listening. They listened the first time, but the second time they were so scared they didn't bother listening anymore. And ensuring the competition is not distorted, which means that the state, or organs of the state, or municipalities can't interfere. So it's there in the treaty. But aside from that, the Union acquired legal status in the Lisbon Treaty, and legal status means it can negotiate international treaties on behalf of the member states. So we don't have them. They assemble a team in Brussels, send them off to negotiate stuff like this, and there will be more and more and more of it. Is it a trade deal? I think I've already said it's not a trade deal. I don't believe it is. It says itself that its main goal is to remove regulatory barriers. That can be anything from collective agreements in the workplace, which, it's a regulatory barrier. It can't be interpreted as such, because it restricts potential profits. If you have to pay your workers a decent wage, your profit is going to be reduced, and consequently that's a regulatory barrier. Certainly anything like the old registered employment agreements and stuff like that will be considered regulatory barriers. Will the minimum wage be a regulatory barrier? I don't know. But they will certainly try that kind of stuff. There's no doubt about that. So there's an awful lot of dangers just in that particular removing regulatory barriers, aside from the regulations that govern the quality of our food and the chemicals that can be used in the environment and all these other kind of regulations. Some good things, I have to admit, we can't do these regulations. Certainly the food regulations are good. We talk all night about those, so I won't. But what I say is that these barriers, so-called barriers, what they call barriers, are some of our most prized social standards. They were hard fought for over the years, and people would be very foolish to give them up. I cite labour rights, food safety rules, and regulations of the use of toxic chemicals, digital privacy, and even some of the banking safeguards that were introduced, poor as they were, following the crisis. They want rid of them as well. And of course now the Tories in Britain are going to get upset about that aspect of it, because of course the City of London will be affected. So, the other thing is, it wants to open up public service, not to private competition, but simply to take over by the corporations. Public service and government procurement contracts are particularly targeted. Now that process has been in train as a result of EU activities over the last 10 years or so. The EU is very slow to implement the provisions of treaties. You might notice that last week a provision of the Lisbon Treaty in the mutual defence area was invoked by France. And of course our very compliant government ran off and agreed to send Irish people off to Mali to be picked off by fellas and pick up trucks and all the rest of it. They were fighting to try and regain some control of their country. Basically, going off to fight France's residual colonial wars. But, most worrying of all, and I'm beginning to wonder about this. Everybody thinks it's the most worrying thing, but I think there's another thing, regulatory convergence, which is even more worrying. This is to sue governments in front of ad hoc, and they are ad hoc arbitration tribunals, irrespective of the fact that there have been changes. They're still recruited from an arm of the World Bank. They have no accountability other than rules written by the World Bank, and they will decide whether a company should be compensated because of measures introduced by a sovereign state like our own, called sovereign state, nominally sovereign. Public policy decisions that affect their profits, they'll be allowed to sue. Or I'll explain later on, but I think that might become irrelevant after about 10 years. So it's not a negotiation between two competing trading partners, but an attempt by transnational corporations to open up and deregulate markets on both sides of the Atlantic. And that's true for CETA and TTIP, both. He's good, he's good, he's very quick. He's very quick. Yeah, actually. So this is a bar chart showing the increase in these investor-state claims against countries. This is from 2000 up to 2013. You see there's a dramatic increase. And this is called ISDS, Investor-State Dispute Settlement. For example, you might have noticed that when the Irish government decided that we're going to go for plain packaging, the Japanese tobacco company decided they were going to, well, they tried to sue the Irish government. They probably won in the Irish courts. But if TTIP or CETA were in vogue, they could have won. So they shut up fairly quickly. But the threat is there. And it was a signal to the government that if, I shouldn't have, it doesn't matter, sorry, you can't read that. That if TTIP or CETA came in, these companies would try to successfully sue the government. And would be successful probably. New Zealand and Australia backed off in the face of such threats regarding plain packaging for tobacco. Irrespective of whether you're in favour of smoking or not, you're against plain packaging or not, the principle still stands. And this provision, I would argue, elevates transnational corporations to the level of a sovereign state. Same legal status. I call that corporate sovereignty. So it's equivalent to a country or a nation. They're the exact same equivalent. And that's exactly where they're heading. That's where we're heading. So the map shows a map of corporations, that map I showed, and the nation state would disappear for what it's worth, and our independence, sovereignty, and all the rest of the continue past. Thanks very much. TTIP would allow corporations to sue countries over environmental protection that threatens their profits. Now this has happened already in the case of Canada. I won't cite a whole lot of examples, but just one. There was a company that was fracking under the St. Lawrence River, and the government of Quebec became very concerned that this might pollute the river, and it flows into some lake they use for drinking water. So they decided that they'd withdraw the license, and they sued them. 300 million is the initial sum they're looking for. And this can go on in all sorts of areas in environmental measures that governments might just decide to do, or people might demand of their government that they do. So there's such a range of things that they can actually sue about. It's absolutely astonishing. You're watching me now, you're not looking. Okay. Expropriation is what they call a government making rules in the interests of their people. It's expropriation if it affects the profits of a corporation. And they sue because they have a reasonable expectation of profits. And I wonder about all of the IDA companies that came in here, because one of the other things is they can sue if there was an inducement. So if we should increase our corporation tax. And all of you would agree with that. Not I certainly agree with that. But if we should do that, then all those companies, obviously their profits will reduce. They could sue the Irish government, each and every one of them, could legitimately sue the Irish government for a reduction in profits. And these are just things that I'm picking out in my head. There are many, many more. And it doesn't matter whether the policy or measure is of a general nature and does not apply to the specific investment. So you really, there is a concept called regulatory chill, which stops governments from regulating in the face of something like this because they anticipate that they're going to be sued. So governments just will stop regulating in the interest of the people they're supposed to be serving. Now, obviously, I just put this in the other day. The treaties also prohibit any restrictions on the repatriation of profits or funds. So it's hands off, no regulation at all whatsoever. So these are the kind of guys down here at the bottom who are doing all this. Very small, the 1% sometimes they call it. So this is regulatory chill. I jumped ahead of myself there. And that would prevent governments from exercising their duties. Governments, even on the demands of their citizens, or on behalf of their citizens, or because they think it's good for their citizens. They just speak. What would it be? I don't know. What do you like the government for them? And then there's the privatisation agenda. I put in this here, I think it's a very wise little quote from Noam Chomsky. The basic principle of modern state capitalism is that costs and risks are socialised to the extent possible, greatest extent possible, I suppose, while profit is privatised. Nice, very succinct summation of where we're at. The privatisation agenda is a big one. Everything essentially, with very few exceptions. There are a few exceptions. Water in its natural state can't be privatised, for example. That's about it. Every other sort of water can be privatised. Anyway, the liberalisation of services markets. That means opening up public services such as health, education and water to private firms. And there was a lot of denial that health would be opened up. An awful lot of denial. And then one day, this guy, Cllr Cieran Perry, was the main negotiator for the EU, he was Portuguese. He was in England and he must have been having a dull moment or something, because he admitted that the NHS was on the table. After denying and denying and denying. So that means all the hospital services in this country are on the table. With one exception at the moment. Some forms of geriatric care. That word is used on the moment, I'm sure it isn't. But you know what I mean, anyway. Care of old people who are not careful looking after themselves. Now, I've been asking about this. Why would this be excluded? I believe there's not much profit in it. So they don't care about it. So, off you go. Right. It'll become, well, this is an important aspect of it. It becomes impossible. CETA is fairly clear about this. You can't restore public services if they've already been privatised. Now, you may know in the water issue that there's been quite a lot of what we might call remunicipalisation of water services. Paris, I think, Berlin's not fortunate actually doing it because of the inefficiency of private provision. Just the inefficiency of private provision. No ideology involved as such. It just simply was not efficient. Now, that would be impossible. And I'll show you some examples later of stuff that we have already privatised in this country. The extent of it is quite shocking, actually, to be honest, in the water area. Go ahead. So, where do water charges come from? Well, the Troika is normally quoted as being the source of water charges, but some of us here will remember the Dublin Federation Against Water Charges, I think it's called. Remember that? Years and years ago, back in the early 90s, wasn't it? Right tackled, but very effective, I must say. So, the Water Framework Directive provided that the full cost of recovery for water use. And Article 9 says, Member States shall take account of the principle of recovery of the costs of water services, and it says something like in full. And they were supposed to have it in place by 2010. Dempsey, who was the minister way back then, went over cap in hand to Europe and got derogation. That derogation was allowed to lapse last December. Government could have said something about it, could have said, hello there, I made an issue of it. But it said nothing. But Minister for Water. Then I discovered that his brother is involved in large scale water acquisitions in the US. Which is probably more right. It's disgraceful. So he's obviously second sorry. So the EU took advantage of the bailout, and of course that will open the way for the sale of Irish water in some form or other, and Irish water is a non structure for sale anyway. And that's one of the dangers of it. And they've already threatened 1,500 redundancies by 2017. What's that for? That's slimming down to sell it on. Now, it has suddenly dawned on a certain union, which are unanimous, that this is a privatisation agenda, and thankfully they've started to do something about it, and they have a mandate for industrial action now, and we'll see what happens. But that's what it's all about. Call yourself. Right. It's not in the interest of the consumer anyway, that's for sure. So, don't think that this is the EU versus the US versus the EU. American workers and American people and citizens are going to suffer as well as a result of this. That's TTIP in particular. Canadians are also going to suffer. There's no doubt about that. Ordinary people are going to pay for this. And it's a huge, it's almost like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but this certainly seems to be a huge conspiracy. And the EU business groups and the US counterparts, just as an aside, I was talking to two senior civil servants about TTIP a couple of weeks ago. Another civil servant set it up. They weren't that happy with the meeting, but anyway. But they told me that the US Chamber of Commerce is in and out of the department of the tea shop with monotonous regularity. And they can get in there like that. Now for them to say that to me, man, endlessly good as well. So you wonder who's running the country. And the commonality between EU corporations, and there are quite a few of them, quite a few big ones, and American ones, they're the same. There is absolutely no difference. So, EU business groups call for the negative list approach to be used in TTIP, which means if you don't name it specifically and exclude it, it'll be up for privatisation. How many things have the Irish government named in CETA, would you think, has been excluded from the privatisation agenda? 4. Count them on less than one hand. I'll show you later on. That's all. Everything else is, we facilitate privatisation. Come on over and grab it. Come on yourself. He went right on. Now this is the CETA consolidated text. This is not kidding anybody. This is the exclusions. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one is about cross-border provision of the supply of executive search services. What's that for? Must be the IFC, is it? Must be. So that's out. Investment, the provision of investment service or investment advice, etc., etc. Sounds like the Financial Services Centre again. Any measure with respect to the provision of privately funded social services other than services relating to convalescent and rest houses and older people's homes. Right, other than. And then economic needs for intercity busing services. Everything else is in. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything else should be privatised. It's a whole privatisation. Now, this is I have to labour my way through this. It's the usual thing. I extracted it out of the CETA just to let you know about the obligations relating to water. They recognise that water in its natural state, such as water in lakes, etc., is not a good or a product, and therefore, except for trade and environment chapter and all that sort of stuff, is not subject to the agreement. Now, these chapters are about preserving the cleanliness of the water, etc., etc. Very important in the context of the Great Lakes in Canada, on the border of Canada and the US, because the US wants to pipe all that water down to California, where, among other things, the commercial bottling firms are using all the artesian water. There's actually a drought in California for the last X number of years. Canadians don't want the Americans to take it, of course. So that's why this sort of vague stuff is written in. So each party has a right to protect and preserve its natural water resources, and nothing in this agreement obliges the party to permit the commercial use of water for any purpose. That reads very well, you know. So there isn't an absolute obligation to privatise. That's just like an awful happening in Britain. That's complete privatisation. You can write in Irish water in Ireland. But a lot of these companies are already operating in Ireland. A lot of these companies here. Plus others like Veolia, a large French company, and others. I discovered a very interesting one called Cllr Cieran Perry. I have it back here anyway. Down in Galway, operating a lot of plants. They're Portuguese. So there's all sorts of outfits operating in the country already. And we might think, yeah, over across the water in Britain, they've got all these different private water companies. We're very close to it as well. Carry on. Carry on to that. Now, because they have to do a sustainability impact assessment on CETA, and they did one, and it calls for cooperation on a separate study outside of this on the impact of privatisation of water sources that might, in the long term, indirectly result from CETA. So they're telling you, we've got to do a study on it, because this is what's going to happen. Indirectly result. So that's written into it. So it pushes privatisation, if you read it, through a ban on equity caps, looking for performance requirements, right, and other service-related measures. Now that sounds very vague, but the government will work hand in hand with them to bring in various regulations regarding the provision of water, which public sector can't meet. And it's all protected by ISDS, I forgot to say that. Now, when I looked at the sustainability impact assessment, it points directly to privatisation. Here's what it says. Canada-EU trade could allow deeper penetration of EU-based water utilities in Canada. This could lead to changes in water management and water consumption. Increased liberalisation in this sector could provide benefits to EU environmental service providers as they are able to capitalise from greater market access to Canada's water management system. That's the secret. It's the water management system they want access to. Couldn't give a shit about the water in the lakes. It's the management system. Pumping stations, filtration stations, all that kind of stuff. And then they can turn off your water. Turn off water to anyone. And this is to me, this is the essence of it. This is the privatisation agenda writ large. And in Ireland, here's the biggest danger. The DBOs, which you may not have heard of, design, build and operate. There are contracts all over the place. I couldn't believe it when I looked at it. Never heard much about these, to be quite honest with you. I took this picture down in Galway of a typical plant. You drive past and you look at it. That's controlling water. And that's well, it's for Galway County Council. I think it's somewhere out near Route Gerard. Galway County Council, and it's in Galway County. The contract value is 16.5 million for the design and build, and then the operation and maintenance is another 16 million for 20 years. Now, that's probably about 6 years old, something like that. I asked around, something about 6 years old. It's operated, by the way, by this Portuguese company, which is an offshoot of this one here, which is also Portuguese. It's called Kavanagh to make it think it's Irish, and has a few Irish elements. Carry on. That's a bit about Kavanagh. It's a big company, it's got 28,000 employees, it's very big. It started off by getting the contract for the water treatment plant in Lochray, and then it went on to do that's Letterfrack and Clonborough, all at around 20 million to design and build. They don't look like 20 million work, do they? 20 million to design and build, and 20 million for a 16 to 20 year contract. If TTIP comes in, and the local authority, and it stipulates in both CETA and TTIP that municipalities are subject to the provisions of the agreement, right down to county councils. So if they try to bring that back into ownership of the county council, be sued. There's nothing sure. Nothing sure, be sued. And the other thing, unfortunately, I can vouch for this, is that the skills will no longer reside in local authorities in 20 years' time. The skills will only be in the private sector. Because a lot of them actually left the local authorities and were actively recruited by these companies. Now, they didn't take everybody, they might take. And this this is part of the problem with Irish Water as well. 1,700 they want to get rid of. Those are still technically local authority employees. They don't care what happens to them after. So it's a huge problem. So that's just a look at what happens in Galway and how dangerous it is. I haven't got time to do a Dublin, but I'll do Dublin eventually and see what's the story in Dublin. It's probably the same. What did I say? That was it. All right. So this is ISDS and water. And if Canadian and US companies or Canadian US domiciled subsidiaries, it struck me the other day that Kerry Group, for example, has a huge subsidiary. What's that smoky thing? Is that the thing going on fire, is it? No, it's not. No? Okay. Oh, that's you, is it? You're going on fire. Oops. Kerry Group has subsidiaries in the United States, big subsidiaries, their profits. Samantha Roadstone Holdings are beginning to grow very big in the United States. They're Irish companies with subsidiaries in the US. They can sue the Irish government back from the United States. Not a crazy situation. Mad stuff. Anyway. So if Canadian or US companies or Canadian or US domiciled subsidiaries successfully bid for the water contracts, government cannot favour local bidders. That's another provision. And a city or council decides it wants to revert to a public system, as municipalities are doing all over the world, these corporations will be able to sue like huge corporations. Government won't take the risk. They just couldn't take the risk. So it's a done deal if CETA or TTIP go through. And the investor state clause in CETA poses another threat. If the government introduces a new environmental, health or safety rules that were not in place when the foreign corporation made its investment, it has the right to compensation, which a domestic corporation does not have. So it's a stranglehold. It's like having the government by the neck. This is ruled by the corporations. Forget about it. It's not bad. It's as serious as that. It is as serious as that. And I didn't make this up. This is copied. These are quotes directly from CETA. This is Canada under a NAFTA rule. Now, this is the Quebec story. There's no right to flag. Carry on to the next one. So this is the foot in the door. I think it allows the conglomerates and corporations to get the foot in the door whenever an Irish council or Irish Water, in fact, should decide to tender for any goods, whether water treatment technology or services. You have to be able to compete directly. And of course, guess who's going to win? Well, it's not that in my mind who's going to win. That contractual relationship then provides a platform, which I call the foot in the door, to expand its interest in water and wastewater systems. And you know probably that they will develop the ability to meter your wastewater as well. And what that will do is, if you save water and you use it, it goes out through your wastewater system, it'll charge you for the water you save. And that has happened in other countries. Because those unions who have taken an interest in this and those organisations that have taken an interest in this have concentrated on the ISDS. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go over here. The investor state. The camera should have a thing that follows me. The investor state system, the ISDS provisions. But these proposals, and they are not as strong probably in CETA as the leaked ones from TTIP. TTIP was the greater threat here. Talks about regulatory cooperation between the two sides that will enable decisions to be made without public oversight or engagement. And these sort of decisions are the decisions that will reduce regulation in various areas. It's a three-step approach. I'll show it in a couple of minutes. And business will actually run it. Big business will actually run it. We won't know what the debate is. We won't know what it's about. It will affect our food safety and various other things. And have a look at that just a minute. And we'll move on to the next one. Regulatory convergence means convergence of regulations moving towards the same standards. We know that the US has lower regulations in many areas than the EU has, for all the EU's faults. And there are three steps in it. First is called mutual recognition of regulations, then harmonisation, and then regulatory cooperation. The difference between this and ISDS is that ISDS will happen maybe X times per year. Maybe you can be sued 3 or 4 times a year. This is going on every day of the week. Every day of the week. Regulatory convergence is operating. Different sectors of the economy will be operating obviously at different levels. Some will be looking at mutual recognition. And I'll explain what that is in a second. My assistant moves on. That's mutual recognition between the EU and the US for a set of, for example, I take the example of safety standards. A US product that meets US standards will be accepted within the EU. So you'll initially have a situation where you'll have goods or foods, products with US standards being accepted in the EU, and consumers will have the choice of buying that one or the EU one, which in many cases will be to a higher standard. And vice versa, of course. And of course, as you can imagine, people who are strapped will buy the one of the lower standard. So the poorer in our society will end up eating even worse food than they eat at the moment, which is a great idea, but I don't think. Next one. Then there's harmonisation. I just put in a bit of GM corn there at the bottom. Pesticides is a huge problem, and cosmetics are a huge problem as well. There are many other huge problems, but anyway, because the US standards are so low. But the US standards on pesticides will be accepted in harmonisation, will be set by the EU for products that it imports. The next step for the industry is to get these standards in the EU down to the same lower level. That's what harmonisation is about, get them down to the same lower level. And I looked at the pesticides lobby document, which says significant harmonisation between the US and EU rules for establishing limits for how much pesticide can remain in food and feed products. The actual value of the trade in that kind of junk between the EU and the US in favour of the US, if there was harmonisation, would be 30 billion per year. A lot of money. That's what they're projecting. So there's an awful lot of interest. And then regulatory cooperation. And this is the one that really blows your mind. Any future measure that could promote, for example, a more sustainable food system or beneficial health-related regulations could be deemed barriers to trade. Barriers to trade is a big thing. And implementation could be refused before they see the light of day. Before they see the light of day. Because in this regulatory cooperation scenario, the meetings are all secret. Don't even know where they're held. Don't even know what they're talking about. First thing you'll know is when you might discover by accident that the standard in food or something else has gone down. This is wide-ranging stuff. Chemicals. You think of it, it's in there. And I just found this interesting. I've never talked much about Cllr, but they have a No to TTIP campaign. And they say TTIP will lower standards on the environment, food safety, personal data, financial services, and much more by giving big business the power to derail or freeze government decisions. That's about Cllr. And this is the council. This is the secret council. Okay? Regulatory Cooperation Council. A streamlined procedure to amend the sectoral annexes of TTIP or add new ones. Add new ones in secret. In secret. It's absolutely right. Through a simplified mechanism. In other words, let's do it quickly. Not entailing domestic ratification procedures. That means no country will say it. It's run by corporations in the interest of corporations. And these are quotes from the actual agreement. So there's no scope for democratic control of any sort, or access even. And then there's a multi-stakeholder advisory committee. This is an app. It means the governments who might intend to regulate and the corporations. And it's to regularly meet and work with the regulators in crafting regulatory measures or in taking decisions on how to further compatibility of existing ones. So that corporations can originate new measures within the Regulatory Cooperation Council. And there's a whole raft of things like these have to be given serious and due consideration and all the rest of it, which means, because it's in secret, of course, governments are just cooperating. Getting good at this. You've got to sell that. It's as big a threat as ISDS, I think. I've explained why I think it is. This is something I found. Business Europe is a big conglomerate, including IBAN. They're part of Business Europe, as you might expect. Business Europe and the US Chamber of Commerce made a submission to the European Commission. And they said they wanted to put stakeholders at the table with regulators, essentially to co-write regulations. They've got it. They've got it. TTIP. The EU Commission itself says TTIP is likely to bring prolonged and substantial dislocation of EU workers. I haven't even talked about the effect on workers. It's absolutely astonishing. Even their own figures are astonishing. Go ahead, Derek. Although, you tell me when you want me to stop.
Maybe about 5 or so.
Yeah, whatever. You just say stop and I'll stop. Okay? Labour standards. I just thought that he's a good ad for Europe. He was, I might remember, asked us to vote for the Lisbon Treaty. That's Mick O'Leary, for those who don't know. So, any labour standard that's a barrier to trade has to be got rid of. That's the objective of progress. Any labour standard, no matter how trivial it is. And you wonder about things like safety standards and so on that we've spent generations really, or a generation at least, building in this country. Collective labour agreements. Never barrier to trade. Absolutely barrier to trade. I fear that something like the minimum wage will be a barrier to trade. So all these, anything that impacts on the liberal business model is a barrier to trade. Anything that affects the model. And there is no limit. We could sit down here all night and start writing down stuff that would do that. Now, we have to know that the USA has refused to ratify 8 of the fundamental ILO conventions. That's very serious. These are ILO conventions related to core labour standards. And there's the ones they have refused to, collective bargaining, for example, freedom of association, the right to organise. And there's a big push in the United States at the moment. In about 50% of the states, they are now called right to work states. And they try to reduce the influence of unions in the workplace. They use various strategies, like you must represent everybody, whether you're a member of the union or not. Cost of fortune in those states. And there are various other measures like regulations taken against union pension funds, union investments, and things like union deductions at source or union dues. No, union dues, I should say deductions, sorry, union dues. Now, will US corporations want the same thing introduced in the EU? Maybe. Maybe we have convergence. Sounds like it might. It might not happen in my lifetime, but we're something around the room. Certainly could see it. And the jobs issue. Minister Bruton said, blah, 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 blah. He said it would add 0.5% to EU GDP and create 400,000 extra jobs. That stuff. Now, what he didn't say was it's 0.5% over 10 years. Divide that by 10 for another 0.5, so it's 0.05% per year. The best projection. And that best projection means the complete integration of the EU and US economies. Hardly that. This has been blown out of the water. They used dummy statistics. I won't go through it. It's a trade mad. Start going through it. Talk to trade unions, I might go through it, but I'm not going to do it here, so we'll move on with it. Now, this guy, using International Labour Organization statistics, he projects a reduction in 7% in GDP of labour share of GDP, a reduction of 7%. Now that could translate into something like 10% drop in wages. Not funny. And it's different for different countries. He didn't do Ireland, unfortunately, but sure anyway. We can say that something similar will happen in Ireland. There is the North American Free Trade Agreement. I don't know if any of you put an interest in that. Terrible consequences for Mexico, not so bad consequences for Canada. It was supposed to create 500,000 jobs or something in the US. Instead, they lost 1 million jobs. And the Rust Belt is the, which you may have heard of, up around Detroit, Michigan, that sort of area. Where you go into towns, it's just factories are broken, and it's just unbelievable. It was in the area last year, this year actually, and it's scary even still. There's some recovery, but not much. And that was the result of a similar TTIP, a weaker TTIP style thing. It also resulted in these madrilleros on the border of Mexico and the US, where people are working in sweatshops, Mexican people, of course, working in sweatshops for negligible sort of wages. that are in semi-prisons a lot. I'm not used to doing this, I don't like that actually. Whose suggestion is this? Yeah, I hate it. If you hear it in a restaurant or something, man, people do this.
I was joking, I didn't think you'd actually do it.
You didn't think I'd do it? Okay, right. The EU's report itself, this is the key figure. It said that 1.3 million EU workers would lose their jobs as a result of the labour displacement arising from TTIP under the Commission's preferred outcomes. 1.3 million EU workers would lose their jobs. So this caused a little bit of a shuffle, and they said, all right then, look at, draw down some of this 70 billion here, the 70 billion in the EU structural and EU social fund, and just sort of boil them off. They're prepared to allow that to happen. It could be worse. It could be a conservative projection. So, CETA, as I said, is ready to, it's on the blocks. We're hoping that some sort of outcome here of the appeal to the seeking the opinion of the ECJ and the EU Singapore agreement will at the very least allow us to all vote. And maybe the government will be changed by then, and some people will be in the dog who might just vote against this thing. There are some at the moment, don't be unfair about it. There are people in the dog who will reject this. But there's no certainty it will even come to the Europeans for ratification. No certainty. The resolution was to encourage other trade unions to join us in opposition and call for the scrapping of TTIP. It was TTIP at the time we were concerned with. And interestingly enough, in the last few weeks, there's been a Congress committee formed on TTIP. That's the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. I managed to get myself onto it, and I don't know whether people know Gareth Murphy or not, he got onto it as well. I'm trying to get a few more people with like-minded people onto it over the next few weeks, and try and get some movement there, because they have access to areas that ordinary lobby rules and ordinary pressure groups wouldn't have access to. Keep up the fight anyway. That's all I say.
Thanks a lot, Frank. As predicted, that was very incisive. I want to thank Baz for working under extremely difficult employment conditions.
Abusive.
Baz, I'd say if you could get some union representation, and maybe not the TWU, I wouldn't recommend them.
Why not?
Words that I say ain't